When it comes to Disney princesses, there's a lot to talk about. We've covered who the most noble princess is, and who the most powerful princess is. But what about intelligence? Who among the Disney royalty really has the biggest brain? And who isn't the sharpest tool in the shed? I'm Kyle with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney Princesses Dumb to Brilliant. But first, we have to review the rules as to what makes a Disney princess. And just to clarify, these are not our rules. If you have an issue with them, take it up with the big mouse upstairs. First, they have to be introduced in an official Disney movie that isn't a sequel. Second, they must be royalty, or the equivalent of such, either by birth or by marriage, or they must perform some grand heroic act, such as saving China, for example. Third, their movie must be a blockbuster hit. Fourth, the feature must be completely animated, since that's what the studio is best known for. Fifth, they have to be human, or the equivalent of such. And sixth, they cannot be bought properties. So characters such as Anastasia, Princess Leia, Captain Marvel, and others like such do not count. That being said, there are a few princesses that, for one reason or another, just barely don't qualify as Disney princesses, so we decided to throw them some love and include them on our list. Additionally, to address the flying elephant in the room, a lot of characters really don't get much opportunity to flex their brains in these movies. For that reason, we had to make some assumptions based on the character backgrounds, as well as be a bit more critical of what information we do see in order to properly rank these characters. Additionally, for those who do get a chance to show off their intelligence, they will naturally get a higher ranking than those who take a more passive role in their movies. This is a lot of talk to say that we're going to be splitting some very thin hairs very closely. So if you don't agree with our list, let us know. With that said, let's get started with our least intelligent heroines. These are the naive, the foolish, and the childishly minded. At the bottom, figuratively and literally, we find Ariel. No, we're not going to place her last on the list simply because she thought a fork was a hairbrush. To her, the human artifacts she collected were basically alien technology, so we can't fault her for not knowing what they were.
A dingle hopper.
What we can fault her for is that she is rash and fails to think about her actions before she does them. She signs a contract with a sea witch without reading it, mind you, despite the plethora of red flags and warning signs around her. She is also incredibly sheltered growing up, leaving her overall ignorant of the world around her, which is a theme that we will see with a lot of these characters. Additionally, in the sequel, she ends up falling into the exact same parenting trap that her father fell into, trying to keep her daughter sheltered away, despite knowing firsthand the dangers of doing so. And let's not forget how the entire plot of the first movie could have been over in a matter of minutes if she'd have just thought to try to communicate with Prince Eric in the first place. I mean, think about it. If Ariel had only tried to write in the sand where he found her, she could have easily explained her situation and gotten him to kiss her with very little effort. For this reason, Ariel certainly earns her spot as Disney's dumbest princess. Sorry. The silver medal of stupid has to go to Snow White. While we really don't get a good grasp of her intelligence due to the passiveness of being an early Disney princess, we can't imagine that she would be terribly smart. Having been forced to work as a maid by her evil stepmother, it's entirely possible that she never received any form of education growing up. What's more, she rarely has any encounter in her movie which would allow her to use her intelligence. The one opportunity she does have, she somehow manages to fumble even that. When she's presented with an apple by the disguised evil queen, the concept of stranger danger seems to have been lost on Snow White, and she just takes it without a second thought. Not the brightest move, to say the least.
I said, how do you do?
It's a similar case with our next entrant, Aurora. Much like Snow White, Aurora never got the chance to display any intelligence in her movie, spending a significant portion of the runtime asleep and locked away in a tower. The only time where she gets a chance to use her intelligence is when she's tricked by Maleficent into pricking her finger on the cursed spinning wheel, blowing her one chance to do anything smart. The only thing that keeps her above our previous entrant is the fact that she was raised as a daughter rather than a servant, making it more likely that she would have received some level of education.
No, I really not supposed to speak to strangers.
Granted, considering she was living as a peasant at the time, it would not have been much of an education, but it's still probably more than what Snow White would have gotten. Rounding out our passive princesses, we find Cinderella just outside our bottom three. Like with Snow White, it's unlikely that Cinderella received much of an education, being treated as a live-in maid for her stepmother and stepsisters. However, we have to place her higher than Aurora, since she never displays any of the lapses in judgment that our previous entries had. She was bested not by being outsmarted, but by Lady Tremaine simply flexing her authority over her. On the flip side, however, this shows Cinderella without any opportunity to show her intelligence, good or bad. What little agency she has in her own films is characterized by overwhelming kindness and patience rather than any form of forethought. Considering her lack of formal education, along with her not displaying any situational intelligence, we have to place her this low on our list.
Bye!
No, wait. Come back.
Finally, completing this section, we have Rapunzel. While she is yet another case of a sheltered princess being ignorant of the outside world, it actually gets worse for her, since she grew up with a toxic parental figure who actively tried to stifle her adoptive daughter's knowledge of the world outside of her controlled prison. Rapunzel never got that opportunity to properly learn and grow. As repressive of an environment as that, it's surprising that she doesn't place any lower. What keeps her as the smartest of this section is that she is at least ready and eager to learn. Even before Eugene takes her out of the tower, Rapunzel has memorized all of the limited library she has access to and had taught herself multiple different art styles during her imprisonment. Impressive, to be sure, but not exactly practical. However, she does retain this willingness to learn, even though she does have a few minor lapses in judgment here and there, such as when she falls for Gothel's trick to bring her back to the tower. Honestly, if it wasn't for Gothel being as toxic as she was, Rapunzel could have easily earned a higher placement. However, because of a technicality, unfortunately, she ends up here.
Who else knows my location?
And with that said, we move into our next section. These are the average folk, or at least as average as Disney princesses get. Starting off this section, we find our first non-official Disney princess, Elsa. As another princess who is isolated from the outside world, it is tempting to want to place her in the previous category. However, sheltered as she may be, Elsa is anything but ignorant. She theoretically spends the majority of her childhood trying to learn about her powers as well as the world around her. She is able to show off her skills and resourcefulness when she banishes herself to the North Mountain, and is able to build herself an ice palace all on her own. And this is also not taking into account the sequel, where she has a much more active role and gets to show off her cleverness even more. That being said, more often than not, Elsa doesn't really get the chance to show off her intelligence. She either relies on the sheer force of her powers, is guided by others, or is simply a passive observer in what's going on around her. What's more, those same powers which she comes to rely on so much are treated as something to be feared, rather than celebrated. Thus, she ends up spending the majority of the first film trying to conceal them, rather than practicing to control them. We don't feel like she deserves to be any lower, but we also can't place her any higher either. Moving on, we have our first and only Pixar entrant, Merida. As the first of our entrants not to be saddled with the handicap of being isolated, it's a bit surprising that she ends up as low as she does. Or at least, it would be surprising if you were to ignore the fact that the main conflict of the movie was caused by her not thinking through her actions. She fails to take her mother Eleanor's concerns into consideration, makes a poorly worded request to the witch, and takes the enchanted cake without asking for any details about what it does. Not only was this a personal failure, but it was also an intellectual one, as anyone with common sense would have been apprehensive about accepting magical food from a stranger. Then again, this is the second time on this list where this exact thing has happened, so what do we know? Despite this setback, she's still a clever and resourceful girl. She's able to survive and communicate with her bear mother.
You're covered with fur!
despite the language barrier, as well as being generally skillful and well-educated thanks to her mother's long list of lessons. She has enough good points to keep her from dropping any lower, but that one black mark against her is enough to put her on the lower end of our list. Coming in 2 spots above her sister, we have Anna next.
Who is it?
In terms of using her brains, Anna is basically a clone of her sister. She's been isolated for much of her life, yet remains aware of life outside the castle due to her education. She has some time to show her resourcefulness in the first movie, and has even more involvement in the sequel. What puts her above her sister is the set of events leading up to the climax of the second movie. She was the one to figure out that the dam must be destroyed in order to bring peace between the people and the spirits. Not only that, but she was also the one to come up with the plan of using the earth spirits to destroy the dam, luring them into throwing boulders towards her to do so. While this is an isolated incident, it's still the most impressive intellectual feat thus far on our list. And while it's not enough to place her any higher, it's still something we have to acknowledge and give her props for. Our next section is where we finally have a lot to talk about in terms of brainpower. These are the college-bound princesses. Not the pinnacle of intelligence, but definitely smarter than the average person. Starting out this section, we find the tribal princess, Pocahontas. Now, considering the differences that her tribe has from our own society, it made her a bit trickier to rank. They don't use academics as a measure of intelligence, but rather a combination of practical skill and spiritual attunement. By that metric, Pocahontas certainly ranks higher, as she has shown herself to be quite skilled in canoeing and weaving, as well as being able to commune with the spirits around her. Fortunately, while she obviously starts off as ignorant to the foreign settlers' way of life, she quickly proves herself to be a fast learner. She is able to learn conversational English in just a matter of days by simply spending time with John, and is also able to teach him about her own ways and culture. Additionally, in the much despised sequel, her learning ability is shown even more, being able to learn upper class etiquette to the level of being able to impress King James.
Your behavior is savage!
Moving on, we're gonna place Disney's latest princess, Raya. There is no denying the fact that she is incredibly capable and able to adapt to most situations, no matter how grim they get. This is something that definitely takes a lot of wits. What's interesting is her evolution in terms of outlook. She starts off as a child, highly idealistic, believing that it is possible for all the different lands to unite, and eventually becoming cynical. One could argue her biggest weakness in intelligence is her initial naive nature, but regardless, she's able to overcome traps and obstacles, and even figures out how to save everyone in the end. From one tribal princess to another, we have Moana. Much like Pocahontas, Moana's intelligence has to be recontextualized by the standards of her own people. However, unlike Pocahontas, there's no clashing of cultures to confuse her ranking, which is good because Moana has a lot going for her. While she does fall short of her family's expectations, she does prove herself to be a capable ruler from the start, spending the entirety of her early life learning her tribe's way of living. However, it goes much further than that. During the course of the movie, Moana also proves herself to be a fast learner, teaching herself the basics of sailing before eventually learning the finer details from Maui. Additionally, she is shown to be able to think on her feet.
Lesson 1. Hit it!
Able to outsmart her enemies in battle. She was also the one to figure out that Tika was actually Te Fiti, making her almost single-handedly responsible for saving the world. Unfortunately, there are a few points against her that keep her from placing any higher. Namely, her headstrong nature can often get in the way of rational thinking, leading her to rush headfirst into danger without any forethought. This can be seen when she dives into Lalotai with no plan and ends up getting into trouble immediately, as well as when she refused to turn back when fighting Tika for the first time, resulting in Maui's hook becoming severely damaged. Because of this, we have to rank her at the bottom of this section, but she's still really intelligent regardless. Just slightly above our last entrant, we have Jasmine. While she is yet another example of a princess isolated from the outside world, Jasmine stands above the others in her situation since she actually gets a chance to use her brains. She is shown to be quick-witted, resourceful, and is often the only one in the room to see the situation for what it is. She was able to see through Aladdin's disguise, and was able to distract Jafar, while Al tried to get the lamp back from him. And while she takes on a more supporting role in the sequels and the TV series, she does still have her moments of being the smartest one in the room. That being said, she is still mostly unaware of the world outside of the palace, and as a result, does make quite a few blunders here and there. For example, she inadvertently steals from a street vendor simply because she doesn't realize she's supposed to pay for stuff. A blunder that would have cost her a hand had Aladdin not intervened. Still, her smarter moments easily outweigh her dumber ones, thus her spot on the upper end of our list.
Then maybe I don't want to be a princess anymore.
Next up, we find another one of our almost princesses, Megara, or Meg for short. When it comes down to it, the best two-word description for Meg would have to be con artist. Sarcastic and wise, being the type of girl who knows what she wants and how to get it. We see this in how she is easily able to lure Hercules away from Phil in an attempt to learn about his weaknesses. Additionally, she was able to find the loophole in Hades' deal with Hercules, sacrificing herself so that he would be able to regain his godlike strength. If it weren't for the obvious, she would certainly place higher. However, we do have to acknowledge that maybe selling your soul to the devil in exchange for your boyfriend's life might not have been the smartest move. Still, as dumb as that was, it's the only black mark on what is otherwise a clever and wise heroine, and love makes you do irrational things. So we can't knock her much.
I'm really sorry. That was dumb.
Yeah.
She really is a smart girl, that Belle. As the first Disney princess to have her intelligence be her defining characteristic, it's a bit surprising that she doesn't rank at the very top. After all, she's an avid book lover who spends hours a day reading just about every book from her local library.
There's no pictures.
Well, some people use their imagination.
Not only that, but she also frequently helps out her father, Maurice, with his inventions, showing respectable knowledge of engineering and applied physics. She was also smart enough to use said invention in order to escape the basement she and her father were locked in, and return to the Beast just in time for the climax of the movie. Though at other times, she's left with being just as passive as her contemporaries, without getting to have much chance to show off her wits. Although she's outside of the top 5, she's still left with enough feathers in her cap to solidify her ranking as highly intelligent. Up next, we have the princess of the digital world, Vanellope von Schweetz. As an AI, she does have a bit of an edge over the other entrants on our list. She has innate knowledge of everything in her world, and can basically use that to manipulate it as she sees fit, with her glitch powers. She knows about hidden secrets and features that even other characters in her game are unaware of, making her easily the smartest character in Sugar Rush. However, therein lies Vanellope's greatest flaw, in that she is mostly unaware of anything outside of her game console. The shining example of this is when she pressures Ralph to bid $27,000 on a steering wheel without knowing that they actually had to pay for it, which was not her brightest move. Still, even when out of her element, Vanellope shows herself to be adaptable and is able to come up with ways to solve whatever situation she's in. She was able to use her racing skills from Sugar Rush and adapt them to the higher octane environment of Slaughter Race to give the best racer in the game a run for her money. And she was able to help advertise Ralph's video on Oh My Disney illegally and get away with it by befriending the Disney princesses and enlisting their help. Really, she's a lot smarter than she gets credit for.
Yes, what is up with that?
Our final entry for this section has to go to Tiana. While she is undoubtedly one of the hardest working princesses, she also has the chops to be ranked as one of the smartest. She has enough business sense to be able to run her own restaurant, and knows the steps that she has to go through in order to make said restaurant a reality. She is also shown to be adaptive and resourceful, being able to apply her skills in cooking into survival skills even when she's turned into a frog and lost in the bayou. She was even able to get the better of Dr. Facilier, a man who made a living conning and outsmarting others with his voodoo magic, which definitely shows a high level of intelligence. And of course, there's a lot of what would be called survival intelligence when it comes to the class and societal disadvantages that Tiana has. The only thing that keeps her out of our topmost tier is that most of this can be just chalked down to good business sense and practical skills, rather than any form of genius. Still, without anything major to dock her for, Tiana earns our 4th place ranking for most intelligent.
So what now?
Finally, we get to the princesses with truly high IQs. These are the geniuses. Our bronze medal of brains goes to the Queen of the Apes, Jane Porter. While we haven't previously covered Jane on these lists, considering she's already been an official Disney princess once before, we feel like that's an oversight on our part. Here we have another case of a female lead whose intelligence is their defining characteristic. However, unlike Belle, Jane actually gets the chance to use her brains during the movie. She starts off the movie on a research expedition to Africa to study gorillas in their natural habitat, during which she is able to show her knowledge about the animals around them, even though her inexperience makes her seem ignorant at first. However, once she has time to adjust to her surroundings, she quickly proves herself to be extremely resourceful and adaptable, being able to keep up with Tarzan and communicate with him and the apes in a short amount of time. What's more, in the animated series leading up to the sequel, this growth is shown to increase further as time goes on, with her being able to not only prove herself capable on her own, but also being able to teach others the same survivable skills she learned over the course of her time in the jungle. This adaptability puts Jane in quite a favorable position, as she has shown herself to not only be intelligent by civilized standards, but also by the standards of the jungle creatures which she eventually ends up with. For that reason, we have to give her the bronze medal of brains.
It can't get any worse, can it?
The silver medal of brains has to go to the war hero, Mulan. If you're wondering why Mulan makes it this high on our list, one need only watch the movie and all becomes apparent. She starts off the movie as a clever yet unorthodox young woman who uses various unconventional methods to get things done. However, when she enlists in the army in place of her father, we see her grow into a capable and skilled warrior over the course of the movie, using her wits as well as her strength. And while you could argue that trying to hide her identity, while knowing that she'll be executed if she's found out, that she's able to pull it off for as long as she did only adds to her intelligence. Even then, she was only found out due to the factors outside of her control, rather than a mistake on her part. If she had never gotten injured in the battle on the mountain, it's likely that she never would have been outed as a woman and would have continued on in service to the army. Speaking of which, that battle also stands as the highlight of her military career, in the event that solidifies her spot on our list. When Shang's forces are ambushed by the Huns, it is Mulan who saves the day, triggering an avalanche which buries the entire Hun army. Not only was this incredibly clever and unexpected, but the sheer amount of physics calculations needed to actually pull it off is really quite impressive. Add in the fact that she did this under pressure, by not only doing so in the middle of battle, but also going rogue in doing so, as the cannon she used was meant to be aimed straight at Shan Yu. And this comfortably takes this act into genius breakthrough territory. Of course, while this is the best example of her intelligence, it's not the only one. She was also the first one to figure out how to pass Shang's test of retrieving the arrow and was able to outwit Shan Yu one-on-one in the middle of combat in the Emperor's palace. Additionally, in the sequel, she's also seen teaching the village children the same lessons she learned in the army and was able to use her head to protect the princesses when they're traveling through bandit country. Honestly, the only reason that she's not at the top of this list is because there's one princess who has just a little more of an edge on her.
Where are you going?
To find someone who will believe me.
Our gold medal of brains has to go to the most underrated princess on our list, Princess Keita from Atlantis, The Lost Empire. At this point, considering how Keita has been consistently at or near the top of all of our lists thus far, the fact that she's still not an official Disney princess is borderline inexcusable by now. That being said, as far as this list is concerned, we have to acknowledge that Keita has a bit of an unfair advantage. The woman is over 8,000 years old, having lived longer than all of our previous entrants combined. The sheer experience alone that she must have accumulated easily places her at the top of our list. Not only that, but we know that those 8,000 years did not go to waste. While the Atlantean society has languished, even to the point of forgetting their own written language, Keita proves herself the most proactive Atlantean in the city. She does whatever she can to try to restore Atlantis to its former glory, even if it means letting outsiders like Milo into the city if they can spark a new renewal of their lost culture. Furthermore, she has mastered dozens of fighting styles and is able to learn almost any language instantly due to Atlantean being the basis for most modern languages. And while she doesn't get much time to show this in the first movie, in the sequel, she is shown using her skills and intelligence to their full capacity in solving problems with ancient Atlantean tech in an environment where she was well out of her element. Honestly, we could be here all day speculating just how much her intelligence places her above those around her. However, it's probably safe to say there's no way that any person on Earth would be able to hold a candle to Keita simply due to how much longer she's had to gain an edge over them, easily earning her the title of smartest Disney princess.
How is it you found your way to this place?
But what do you think? Let us know in the comments section if you agree. Be sure to hit that notification bell and binge our Dumb to Brilliant playlist, where we break down the brain power of the characters in your favorite cartoons, shows, and movies. But most importantly, stay wicked.